welcome everyone to the second working group on open science capacity building. I'm very pleased to see everyone joining, and in fact the numbers are just creeping up slightly, but it's good to see a good attendance today. Next slide, please. So this meeting is, as I said, open science capacity building, and it's in the context of the implementation of the open science recommendation. And this working group, as I hope you know by now, is one of the 5 thematic working groups that we've set up. And the others are on policies and strategies, financing and incentives, infrastructures, and open science monitoring framework. And so let me give a special welcome if it's the first time you've joined us today, and a kind of warm welcome back if you've already joined and participated in the previous session of capacity building or in any of the other sessions. I didn't introduce myself at the beginning. My name's Ezra Clark. I'm the Chief of Section of Science, Technology, Innovation Policy in the Natural Sciences sector here in UNESCO. And just a quick, let's say a quick recap. So the main objective of the open science capacity building and training activities is to create and enhance and develop the capacity building of different open science actors, both at institutional, individual, national level, to help build the understanding, design, implementation and supervision and monitoring of open science practices in line with the UNESCO Recommendation on Open Science. Next slide, please. So just as a kind of an overview, this slide really summarizes the main objectives of the open science capacity building working groups, and we'll go into a lot more detail on this, but just to mention at this stage that we as a group, we can say, have already made good progress on the first 3 of these objectives. So these ones kind of highlighted in orange. So the mapping of existing training initiatives and materials, the selection of training materials for the open science platform or index, and some gap analysis. So I say we've made good progress in the fact that we have the first drafts, but of course to mention these will never in a sense be fully finalized, because they'll evolve and be updated as we identify and collect more information, more tools and so on. But we can say these 2 are already in pretty good shape, and you received the drafts some time ago, but colleagues will speak to this very shortly. And then the 4th objective, where we can see here on the screen, filling the gaps and monitoring impact, is really where we can focus future efforts. So if we go to the next slide, just really a quick overview of how we'll do things in this afternoon session. Afternoon for us, morning for others, I'm sure. So we'll start with a presentation of the draft guide and key principles for capacity building for open science, and after that we'll have a discussion specifically on that. Then we'll turn our attention to a presentation and discussion of the open science capacity building index, as I said, with a discussion afterwards, and then to look at some of the next steps for this working group. So without further ado, and just to press on then, let's start with the draft guide and key principles for capacity building in open science. And for this purpose, I'll please give the floor to Tiffany Straza, who'll take us through this section. Tiffany, floor's yours, and the slides are up on the screen ready. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ezra, and thank you again, everyone, for joining us or for listening to the recording later. This was the first working group meeting that we held for open science this year. So to refresh our memories, let's start with a reminder of what we asked and what we discussed during that first meeting. If we can go to the next slide, there we go. So our task was to figure out the main capacity building needs for open science, recognizing that these can vary regionally, they can vary by discipline, but we wanted to see what the major next steps needed were to build capacity for open science and what the challenges facing that pathway is. We also asked about the existing and successful open science training initiatives around the world, recognizing that building capacity is training materials, but it's also existing relationships, training programs, integrating capacity building into the core work of open science around the world. We did ask for the existing capacity building materials. We heard from you that it was useful to collect these in partly so that we can work openly with them, so that we can reuse, remix, translate, localize, and harness the existing resources that are already there. And we wanted to look at the strengths and weaknesses, including who they serve and who they might be not serving enough yet. And then we asked you about the role of UNESCO in terms of open science capacity building. We heard from you during that first meeting by email and through our co-working on a document, which turned into the PDF that you were sent this week. So we're going to talk about these overarching principles. We heard clearly in the first meeting of this working group that there are two major parts of capacity building for open science. First is building an awareness and an understanding of open science itself, why science as usual can change and should change. But the other is the specific skill sets and theoretical understanding or resources needed for open science in practice. This training can range from the specific open tools or infrastructures or methodologies that are used in a specific discipline, or to the specific kinds of actions that need to be taken by different players in scientific systems around the world. So we're kind of looking at both of these aspects of building capacity. As Ezra has already mentioned, we're tasked with supporting different open science actors working at a variety of levels, such as the individual or institutional or national level, and in the diversity of disciplines, local contexts, and more. So our aim doesn't need to be, and perhaps should not be, to force all training for open science to be the same thing, but rather our job is to help those different actors access the kind of information that they need to take their next steps towards open science. Because of that diversity and because of our decision collectively to take a coordinated global approach to open science in the framework of the recommendation, we've started collating those available training materials to see and to draw attention to what is readily available and see who is served. So Ferry will be presenting that information today in a little bit, but let's keep that diversity in mind when we consider that there are approaches for building capacity for open science that are important for us to keep in mind and to hold in common, even as we address that diversity. We can use these approaches to guide us when we are introducing new participants to open science, when we are conducting training programs or initiatives, and of course, when we are using or creating or writing training materials. So with your help, we've defined these guiding approaches in the document that you have today. You can go to the next slide, Ferry, please. So this document was sent to you in the reminder for today's meeting, but of course, you've had access to it for a long time in our co-working space. And thank you again to everyone who submitted suggestions, but also direct edits. It was really helpful. So these are the guiding approaches or principles. I'm not sure if we're going to stick with that word for it, but guiding approaches. The first is an awareness of existing materials. Let's harness the value of open science and of working openly, because the adaptation of an existing resource may be the most efficient way to build a training program and to avoid duplication or wasteful use of resources. This is another core reason for the mapping exercise that we're going to be talking about in a few minutes. So yes, this takes us right to the core of working openly. This is about sharing the best in the fastest way possible to harness replication. And in order to work from those existing materials, we can follow best practices for adaptability and reuse. In addition to making training materials findable, interoperable, and so on, we can use open licensing to help us share better and share credit better. We can also use new open tools that support translation, contextualization, and integration within existing institutional technologies, such as knowledge management systems. All of that remixing and reusing those tools are important because one size does not fit all, so we need flexibility. Flexibility is important for us to progress towards open science that is equitable. And flexibility is, of course, bolstered itself by open practices and open ways of working. When it comes to engagement of the target audience, it's important to consider not only the diversity of those audiences, as already mentioned, but also the specific ways in which we are asking them or expecting them to encounter open science. We have heard from you that both bottom-up and top-down approaches, by top-down we mean something like the use of a policy to mandate open science training in a given institutional setting, for example. We heard from you that both bottom-up and top-down approaches can be effective, and we need to make sure that our training materials are ready for those multiple modes of engagement. And we need to make sure that we pursue that broad engagement. Building capacity relies on building relationships, not just textbooks and e-courses. And that leads us to sustainability, because there's a relationship there. When we consider the sustainability of building capacity or of a given training material, we're talking about both physical resources and community practices. We've heard from you that it is maybe not a mistake, but a weakness to embark upon capacity building without an adequate approach to resourcing and sustainability. Again, open practices themselves support sustainability. And when we consider the training that we need at the regional level or global scale, it becomes clear that sustainability also depends on equal participation of scientific actors from less resourced institutions or countries. And this links with the need to ensure an inclusive approach. There are many kinds of diversity, and if we don't consider this diversity, we can weaken our progress towards open science, and we can weaken the training resources that we use to get there. By contrast, we can take this diversity into consideration, and we can harness open modes of working to help us embrace and benefit from this diversity. And we heard from you that key aspects of diversity that we must work on globally in the open science community are the languages and the context within science. So when we're talking about multilingualism and localization, this has special meaning on a technical or technological level. But again, there, open science tools and open infrastructures can even make that translation, transliteration, and localization easier. So we're running out of excuses to not work multilingually and harness localization. When it comes to accessibility, you'll see this takes up a fair chunk of the document that you have in front of you. There are several aspects of accessibility that we need to take into account when we are seeking to build capacity for open science. And it all goes back to the core idea that by working openly, we are trying to bring more voices in, more perspectives in, so that we can improve our science. For example, with open access, it's only logical that training materials about open science should themselves be openly available. And not just training materials, but also our lessons learned, our practices, and to a sense, our flaws as well, what didn't work. The more we work openly and the more we create open access to that information, the better we can all progress. We can also consider the FAIR principles: findable, interoperable, reusable, and open licensing, archiving, to make sure that these resources that we spend on open science are not just spent once, but can be reused, can be used again and again, and can be harnessed by others, including those with fewer resources. We also heard from you clearly that we need to address the diversity of learning methods and approaches. This is linked with inclusivity, but goes beyond it to a little bit more specific technical detail that you'll see in the document. We really want to make sure that when we are producing something that we're used to train new open science practitioners, that we create it in such a way that it really serves the entire community, and that it can be harnessed and be accessed, be machine read, be read in different ways, stored in different ways, so that it has a longer lifespan and a broader reach. And finally, monitoring and evaluation. This is, of course, a huge topic in and of itself for the entire recommendation or the entire approach to open science, but it's also part of capacity building. We need to monitor what we're doing and how we're doing within our capacity building efforts. For a simple example, we can gather information about trainees before and after they go through a training program in open science. When we collect these materials and open up our monitoring and evaluation studies, this will help us learn as a community, and it will help us improve not just our specific training materials, but also our approaches overall. So That sums up the document that you have in front of you, and we'd love to open the floor for discussion of that today. I want to say again that we recognize that building capacity is a lot more than writing a training course. And I hope we've adequately reflected your thoughts on the major factors to consider when we're building capacity for open science in your region and in your discipline. And where we've missed the mark or where you have another idea to address, I hope that we can bring it up today. So I'll hand it over to Anna to moderate this discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Tiffany. So my name is Anna Peršić. I also work at UNESCO, the section for Science, Technology, Innovation Policies, and very happy to be part of the team that is now working on the implementation of the recommendation. And again, thank you all very much for joining. We have some 60 participants, which is really, really good for the working group. Again, I see that there are people from different parts of the world, people that represent different actors of open science. So thank you all very much again. It's very important for us that we get these perspectives and inputs from a broad open science community. So you've heard Tiffany's presentations. You have the document in front of you. I think that it was also shared in the chat, so everybody can have access to it. It would be very useful for us to get your comments, both now that we can discuss them and then also later on maybe in writing if there is anything, so that we can adapt the document and edit it and finalize it for a first launch sometimes in December for the World Science Forum. So if anybody would like to start the conversation, please, the floor is yours. I can see that Cecile Swiatek made a comment. Cecile, would you like to share it with us?
Yes, so hi everyone. I'm turning on the camera. I'm very happy to be here today. Yes, I read with a great interest the draft proposed, and I had actually one question. This is the one in the chat. We are mentioning the FAIR principles, but I was wondering, why don't we use the 5 recommendations about OERs? Because if we are supporting capacity building, it's good to have the standards maybe that are in line with sharing educational resources. I could go also with interoperability and other proposals, but this would engage us to follow also another recommendation by UNESCO, which is the 2021 year one on OERs. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, that's great, and thank you very much for reminding us of that. Of course, we are working together with the colleagues from the other sector that are kind of taking care of the recommendation of open educational resources, and I think it would be indeed important to maybe be a little bit more specific when we make reference to that recommendation. It is in the document, but it is true that the 5 R's, the recommendations, could be added in the document indeed to reinforce this connection between OER recommendation and UNESCO recommendation on open science. And indeed, this is in particular the place where they do come together. Anybody else that would like to say something? Please, you can raise your hand or you can just, start. Ashwini, please, the floor is yours.
Hello, are you able to hear me?
Yes, very much so. Yes, great.
Basically, for open science initiative, could we also add the subjects and the research areas of open science, such as, for example, physics, chemistry, and latest technologies? Could we add the subjects also into the list of knowledge building materials also? Like what could be the definition?
Absolutely.
Of which are the various types of subjects which could be included into the framework of open science? Is one factor which could be considered?
Absolutely, no problem for that. And indeed, we do, when we reference and when we talk about open science in general, with regards to the UNESCO recommendation of open science, we are talking about pluridisciplinary areas where all the different disciplines are actually represented. And when we will be talking about the index for open science that we will be putting together based on the different materials that we have collected so far, we will indeed be able to also search them by discipline, even though many of the open science capacity building materials are kind of universal and cover different disciplines at the same time. But in any event, for sure, the idea with open science is that it refers to the different disciplines, including humanities, in terms of openness and the principles of open science. Tiffany, did you want to add something?
Please, I would just like to comment that we've already seen that there's overlap between the open educational resources, the recommendation on open educational resources, and our recommendation on open science. We had a, Ferry will go into this later when we were addressing the materials that you all submitted for training in open science. There were a few instances where we did remove certain pieces because they were too specific to a discipline. Our goal here as a working group is to find those materials that teach us how to do open science. And it might be discipline specific in the sense that, you know, this is how I'm teaching my students in physics to take this open methodology that we use in this field and practice open science in this way. But it wouldn't be, this is my open educational course on physics. That would be something that it is being collated and collected to be available globally. That's the task of our colleagues working on the recommendation on open educational resources. So that's the difference between the two. We are interested in sharing materials that teach us how to conduct open science and improve our open science practices, even when they're discipline specific. I hope that helps clarify what we're collecting. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much. I have another clarification here. If we have published books on open science in certain platforms and publishing platforms, could we submit it to this working group also for review and addition to the educational resources catalog?
I would say yes, please. As long as it's teaching about open science, books are absolutely one category of training material. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I would definitely submit it to the group.
And as long as it's open access, of course.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
I see an interesting question from Flavio Azevedo, which I think might be of interest for everybody, actually. Flavio, if you can, would you like to share your question with everybody, and then we'll reply and discuss that a little bit also. Great.
Hi there, everybody.
Hi.
Oh, I'm sorry for the background. I gave a presentation on. I'm sorry.
It's okay. We don't see it.
Ignore it.
It's relevant though, so that's very good.
Yeah, it seems like I'm doing advertising, which is not the case. I'm sorry. In any case, all right. I've mentioned to both of you that it's important to give credit to researchers who have invested significant time into the draft or that contributed to the collection of resources, especially researchers from the global south and low and middle income countries. And I didn't see names mentioned, and I wanted to know the status of that request or issue raised. And as well as in the draft, there were several sources of interesting, general topics, so preprints, publications, and I think there was 2 web pages as well. And I didn't see those mentioned, only overarching resources that are sort of general. So I was wondering why those sources were not present in the current draft that you sent in a PDF format via email. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. And it's important to raise these questions because it's important to be clear on how the guide is coming together, what is in there, and how everybody will be. So our idea was for the parts of the toolkit to kind of reference the Open Science Working Group on capacity building as contributor to the draft, and there is link to it with all the members of the group. If you would prefer something a little bit more explicit, we can maybe find a way of making the contributions more explicit. But in our view, it's really the working group in its totality that has provided inputs, and then the members of the working group are known, and they are going to be listed, and they already are listed in the on the website and in different other places. The way we have collected, so we receive materials, of course, and inputs from different sources, from different people. And the way we are looking into it is, as Tiffany was saying, with this guide, we wanted to provide an overall framework for capacity building with some kind of higher level principles. And then there will be some more specific issues, which either will be taken up in other fact sheets or guides that will go a little bit more into detail into certain thematics, or we will be able to pick them up somewhere else later on. So we don't want to put too much details at this stage for these principles in general, or guidance in general. When we will be taking the different themes more specifically, then we're going to go a little bit more into detail on that. So if that was your question, then this is the answer on our side. And maybe Tiffany, you want to add a little bit?
Sure. I think you've addressed most of it, Anna. And I do want to recognize the people who contributed, Flavio being among them, who gave us quite a bit of text and ideas and had a wonderful conversation with us to progress this forward. So I do want to make sure that we share credit in a way that people feel comfortable with. Yeah. So, you know, let's hear from the working group about that today. If anyone else wants to speak up or send us an email, just let us know what you need for that. The other aspect of what you saw removed from the draft, which was actually removed last minute, why we don't link to specific scientific articles and resources. It was kind of, you know, if I talk about my neighbor's apple tree, then I'm not talking about my other neighbor's plum tree. And we felt that it either needed to be comprehensive, which wasn't really possible within this framework of this document, or we risked inadvertently leaving out and ignoring others. We certainly can add citations where appropriate, but remembering that this document is part of the toolkit, and another piece of the toolkit is the link to capacity building resources, is the link to infrastructures, is the link to policies. I hope that we can use this package to direct people to those excellent resources that exist. And again, FORT is one example of how that information can be collated and presented with your compendiums and of existing literature and glossaries and whatnot. It's very useful for anyone on the call who's not familiar with the FORT website. Please go check it out. But yes, our goal is to draw people in and to those other resources. And again, if you have suggestions for how we can improve the way that we do that using the toolkit as a whole, we're happy to hear them. Thank you.
I have one question, please.
Yes, Susanna, please.
Yeah, okay. I'd like to touch a bit about the principle and on the building capacity. I want to touch on the engagement and also on the accessibility. This is under the initiative under UNESCO. I also noticed that I want to take this opportunity, at least the rest of the members who can give some input, feedback. Example like we have few call it initiative under Stefan. So we have under Stefan category 2 as well. Our objective, our vision also looking into the open science, because I'm on behalf of the chairman for Stefan. Stefan stands for the Science, Technology, Innovation Policy for UNESCO, category 2. And we also have another association under Alpine. All under
Excuse me, Susanna, can you
working together with each other, but we are under UNESCO umbrella. Yeah. Excuse me.
Yes,
You
the
can hear
sound
me?
is a little bit bad. So yes, if you could just maybe come closer to the microphone, and then we'll hear a bit better.
I'm talking about the engagement.
Yes.
Can the members hear me? Okay. Engagement
Yeah.
and accessibility of the open science. Yeah. I can see there's a little bit of duplication of effort under the same institution under UNESCO. Yeah, because I'm coming from Stefan, category 2 of UNESCO. There is science, technology, engineering, and innovation for policymakers network. And also, I'm coming also from ISTIC. ISTIC stands for the International Science Technology, and we also have both have a vision mission on open science. How we can application and also access to all into one platform, to one capacity building agenda. So that's my question, how we want to look into this as well.
Thank you very much, Susanna. If I understood correctly, the question is how do we kind of better collaborate, work together with Stefan and ISTIC on these issues of engagement with society for open science. And of course, I mean, we are very, very lucky to have you as part of UNESCO family. The principles that are described here really give like a broad overview of what should be done. Then the question is really to come to different institutions and different bodies, different individuals who are actually working on these issues on the ground. So we would be very, very happy to engage in a conversation with you to see how we can collaborate more. We already did have some conversations with regards to some other themes, because both Stefan and ISTIC are involved in different parts of open science that are very much relevant for UNESCO. So we can pick up this conversation on engagement with societal actors to see if you have some training materials that you would like to share also through UNESCO's platform on open science capacity building, which does not mean that we will now be doing that work. Absolutely not. We will just be advertising the capacity building materials that you actually have produced through your work. And just to also inform you that there is a work undergoing, and maybe Uta, I will ask you to just say a few words about that, on the engagement of societal actors in open science practices. We can do a little bit of publicity for the upcoming workshop in October, beginning of October, where we will be looking precisely in some of these issues. And then coming up with another fact sheet or another document that would actually speak to the engagement of societal actors in open science. How do we do it? Who is supposed to be doing it? And what are the principles for that engagement? So maybe Uta, if you want to say a few words about that, that would be very useful at this stage, actually. And by the way, I also saw some of your comments with regards to this document. So if you can share those as well, it would be great. We can't hear you very well. No, is it me or we can't? We cannot, right? Try one more time. We were hearing something.
Yep. I can hear you
yeah,
now.
Perfect.
Okay, excellent. Hi, thanks, Anna. Hi, everybody. On the open of societal actors, we have worked closely with UNESCO on this from the citizen science, open science community of practice that have already, of course, also contributed to the drafting of the recommendation initially. Now we're very happy to help with the implementation, and citizen science, other forms of open engagement of societal actors, of course, very important in that. So we're trying to pool resources across the globe from various people whom we've invited to help clarify the terminology, what we mean by open engagement of societal actors, drawing on case studies, and also, again, also trying to bring together guidelines and principles of how to drive this open engagement of societal actors into open science policy or current science policy. So that's an effort that's going on. We have split into 3 thematic working groups that are working on a very tight timeline, 10 weeks in fact. And people also very happy to join this effort. So you can contact me. I'll put my contact details down in the chat in a moment. Related to that, we'll be holding a workshop targeting policymakers at next week's European Citizen Science Association conference. So we have a workshop holding together with Anna and colleagues back to back with the EXA conference, again targeting policymakers to really understand what their bottlenecks are in terms of truly opening up science policy with respect to the open engagement of societal actors. So we'll be hearing again from a number of, let's say, leaders around the world, but also we'll have an interactive part where we're really trying to understand better the specific bottlenecks for policymakers. So we can then use that to inform the guidance that we're trying to together on a global level. If I may elaborate on the comments I made, to the extent that UNESCO serves as a sort of one-stop shop or gateway or whatever we want to call it, you have convening power where people will look to what is this open science thing, how do I do it? In terms of capacity building, the other point I wanted to make that, of course, you're not going to run all this, but you're going to be the guidance for people to, find the right kind of capacity building, training, mentoring, whatever. All these resources at the end of there now worth thinking through that we have a really user-driven, user-centric approach. That if I'm a policymaker, you want to guide me different material than if I'm a researcher or if I'm a scientist. So just in terms of thinking through the interaction, the interfaces, how this could work, taking FAIR and the disabilities a step further to really making sure different users get dished up targeted materials for their purpose. And then the other term, you touched on this, and we have the same problem with the work I just described, this somewhat overuse of the term principles. We end up having principles for the principles, we end up sort of with a list of principles of recommendation of the work we're doing in the working groups, etc. So I just wanted to support the idea that indeed maybe we need to think about the terminology there.
Great, thanks so much, Uta. And indeed, I mean, on a couple of points that Uta just raised, the part on the engagement with societal actors, that indeed is one of the gaps that we do see while we were collecting the materials and why you were sending us different materials. It needs to be unpacked a little bit more, and there needs to be a little bit more awareness raising, and again, anything that you can share with us in this regard would be very, very useful. With regards to different target audiences, again, we have seen several gaps while we were doing our mapping exercise. So this is also something that this group and possibly work in the future on open science capacity building should be looking into, and that is which are the audiences that are now left behind with regards to open science. We have seen a couple of them, and again, Ferry will be talking about it a little bit later when we talk about the index. But we do have to, or collectively do a little bit more effort now to really address the different audiences when we develop the different capacity building materials, trainings, activities, capacity building activities, etc. So great, thank you very much for that. Anybody else would like to say something, share with us their comments or their inputs that would be very useful for us? I don't see any more hands. I don't know if colleagues have seen something additional in the chat that has not been addressed yet. Tiffany, Ferry, do you see anything else? Ezra?
Just a technical comment. I noticed that some people had trouble hearing Utsa. We're going to do our best in the meeting report and then the recording to make sure that everyone can hear Utsa's or receive Utsa's comments. And also Laura will be sharing a couple of documents in the chat to follow up on the 2 key pieces of work that Ute has mentioned, one of which is the workshop for policymakers to be held in Berlin on the 5th of October. And the other one is this collective work to bring together the best and the next steps guidance for open engagement of societal actors. So please look to the chat for those. I also noticed Chris's comment in monitoring and evaluation, looking at relevant metrics. I think, yes, this concept of monitoring and evaluation goes beyond capacity building. But when we're just looking at what we need to measure for capacity building, I think we still have a long way to go, because we want to measure and monitor not just who's participating, who is part of the open science community and how is that changing as we build capacity, but also what is the impact of specific kinds of capacity building initiatives? Where does one kind of resource or one kind of approach work, and where does it not? How can we improve our efforts for capacity building to make it also open and equitable around the world? I don't think this document is going to solve that question, but I hope it brings up the question, and I hope that it begins to have us look at what monitoring and evaluation will mean and should mean for building capacity in open science. And I think we're going to be coming back to you with those questions later on of how can we best check on what we're doing as a community trying to build capacity for this work. You know, how can we answer that question of whether we're walking in the right path or how we can improve? So thanks for bringing that up, Chris.
Thank you very much. And I see the point from Gita, which also brings me to another point, and the one that was made earlier from our colleague from Stefan. We still have our survey for capacity building materials open, and we will share the link with you here and share it again on in the chat and share it again on the slides. So if you are aware of specific training courses, training materials, resources, which we still don't have in our index or in our initial mapping, please do send us that information through the survey, because that's the easiest way for us to collect it in a way that makes sense, and we can easily add it to the materials that we already have. So the collection of citizen science training materials that is mentioned here in the chat, the training materials that Susanna, our colleague, was talking about a little bit earlier, it would be great. And we received a few emails also saying that some of the materials have not been added. Please do use that quick survey that we are using to be able to collect all the different materials. And again, we will share the link in the chat and on the upcoming slides as well. Any other comment? And same from Cecile. We will have a look at it, but again, if you could just very quickly put it in the survey, that also kind of sorts it out in the way the index will later on be sorted out, and it's going to be much easier than for us to present it on the index that we are doing. Perfect. Thanks so much. Great. Thank you, Cecile. Anything else? Anybody else would like to share something or guide us in our guidance for policy for open science capacity building? If not, then thank you very much for this very useful discussion. We will gather these comments, and again, you will have an opportunity to provide additional written comments if you so wish until the 5th of October. We'll put it all together, we'll do a second draft and share it with you for finalization. And again, as Ezra was saying, all of these are intended to be as kind of rolling documents, because we do realize that there is more and more that we are learning about open science, and we are keeping both these platforms indexes as well as the actual guiding documents quite open, in the sense of we can adapt them and change them as we move forward. So again, thank you very much for that. And and we will continue now with our discussions and with the presentation on the materials that we have collected and on the plans for the index. So the index is not out there yet. We wanted to see how this meeting goes, what you have to comment on the different training materials and other issues that we will raise here with you. And then we are working with our IT colleagues here at UNESCO, hopefully for a launch of the index on the 7th of December for the World Science Forum in South Africa. But first, Ferry, please, the floor is yours for the review of the capacity building resources that we've received and the index.
Thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone, and thanks, colleagues, for your questions and comments. I hope we can address a few of them also here. So I'm happy to share an overview of the materials that we have received from you and we collected initially. My slides are okay, right? Yes?
Yes, we can see them. Perfect.
Perfect. So yes, so far we have collected 106 open training resources on how to conduct or practice open science in different formats. The majority of these training materials are online courses, annotated syllabuses, and also handbooks, written textbooks, and guides. We also had few training materials like recordings of previous events, workshop slides, and list of reading and resources. These materials are targeted at different groups of audiences. Many of them are targeted actually as multiple groups of audiences, particularly at researchers, STEM students, and early career researchers in the scientific fields. But there are less resources addressed to funders, indigenous people, and marginalized groups, publishers, and policymakers. The majority of these materials are in English. There are a few on Spanish and French, but there is a lack of diversity on languages. And again, a majority of these materials are either developed or hosted by entities in the global north, Western Europe, and North America. But at least one material, training material from each other region is available. Talking about the topics that these materials cover, to implement the recommendation on open science, it would be important to have capacity building materials that cover the definition of open science as provided in the recommendation with its pillars, and it also covers the areas related to the areas of action that are needed for the implementation of the recommendation. So based on the text of the recommendation, we have sorted the topics as open science, its definition, scopes, values, and principles, and the pillar of open science, open scientific knowledge, which includes open access, open data, open educational resources, open source, open software and codes, and open hardware, the pillar of open science infrastructure, the pillar of open engagement with societal actors, and open dialogue with different knowledge systems. Then we also consider capacity building on policy instruments important, as well as capacity building on open science funding and incentives, intellectual property rights in relation to open science, and open science for early career researchers, and finally, open science monitoring. So based on these categories, we have looked at the materials that we have received through the mapping, and the majority of them are covering the open sharing of scientific knowledge, and its elements such as open data, open access, open peer review, open source and softwares, which are the columns showed in blue here. And there are then a few resources only on the pillar of open science infrastructures and the open dialogue with indigenous knowledge holders and marginalized groups. So based on this, we can form the index, the online index, and sort these materials based on the type of resources, targeted audience, language, the region or country that creates and hosts the document, and the topics, of course. And if you think there is some other aspects of these courses that would be important for sorting out and guiding the users to go through them and find the appropriate training materials for themselves, please let us know. Then we have received and we can include additional information about these courses, such as, for sure, like the creator of the resources, the last date that it was updated, the discipline of the targeted group, type of the open license, and the readiness for adoption or translation to other languages. So the gaps that we have identified here are lack of linguistic and geographical diversity. We have realized that there is need for additional capacity building resources for different groups of audiences, as I mentioned earlier, policymakers, funders, publishers, indigenous people, marginalized scholars, and local communities. We have also noticed that there is a need for additional capacity building resources on the topics of the recommendation itself, open science monitoring, open science hardware, open science and intellectual property rights, infrastructures, dialogue with other knowledge holders, and open science funding and incentives for open science. And as Anna mentioned, the survey for mapping open science capacity building is remaining open, and we would be really grateful if you can share your inputs, additional inputs with us through that. Thank you so much for your attention.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Ferry. I hope this gives you a bit of a more of an idea of what we have collected so far, thanks to your help, of course, what we will include in this first draft of the index, and more or less how the index will look like. We will share the first maquette of the actual index and platform with you in the coming, hopefully, months. Normally, we were promised that it would be done by the end of October, so we will have something to show you at the end of October and to share with you in index-wise. So again, it would be very, very important for us if you could have a look at the different resources that we have collected so far. See if there is something major that we did not include, or something that we did include that which should not be there for a reason that you can share with us. And then also, and I already see a nice conversation in the chat, what are the important things that need to be mentioned in the index, knowing that, of course, I mean, these are links to the actual training materials. On the UNESCO website, we will have the link, but a little bit of an information about each of this resource and the possibility to sort it out and to look for it by different categories. So these categories and what additional information should be there, this is something that it would be very useful to hear from you, some of your comments and your additions. And I have Chris's hand and then Susanna. Chris first, please. Go ahead.
Hi there. So you caught it, but I want to give it more emphasis. But the indigenous knowledge area is really where, at least in my position, when I'm working with data as a data steward and software, is that I've been hoping for a wider community to form, because I think especially with things like the care principles, and it's very, at least at the moment, the way that I think we sort of interact right now is that there's a small group of people that put together the care principles, and you know, it's also like I see these conversations of which communities can we reach out to, and you know, it's sort of a network communication channels that, you know, I think could really benefit from UNESCO's, you know, maybe highlighting it even further, and maybe resources or whatever. But I feel like, you know, be immensely valuable if we could help with expanding that community and really, you know, broadening it so that we can have a richer, you know, community to draw from for, you know, for working with these particular, you know, like some of the questions that come up and other things. So if I could just say, emphasize that one, that's what I wanted to say.
I agree, Chris. That's a very good point. And I wonder, of course, it's relevant in the capacity building, but it's also relevant for policies. It's also relevant for infrastructures and platforms for exchanges of information. It really is relevant across the different themes. And I wonder, you know, once we start thinking about the next round of cross-cutting themes that really need to be addressed more in detail, this dialogue with other knowledge systems, I think, will have to come in as a priority. We, of course, at UNESCO have our LINKS program, the Local Indigenous Knowledge Systems program, and we are working with them to try to see how to better connect that community with the community of open science. And we had a lot of exchanges with them for the drafting of the recommendation. We have to reinforce these exchanges again now for the implementation of the recommendation. So thanks so much for mentioning that. And we'll try to boost this part also of the capacity building resources as much as possible in the index that will be created. So thanks again for that. Susanna, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Anna. Okay, thanks for those presenting about the index. Just through my observation. Can you hear me? Sorry, my line is very good.
Perfect. Yes, perfectly. Go ahead.
Okay. I noticed that one of the actors missing, if we think that we want to add on, especially on the company side, on the organization side. Yeah. So we don't have the organization or the companies represent into this index as well. Because why I highlighted that one, because when talking about open science, on behalf of the policymakers, because from the Asia Pacific side and from policymakers, we look at technopreneurship. Technopreneurship is one of the open materials that everybody is looking for, especially on the case study for the technology commercialization, because this is the one is really can bring on the open science. They want to help each country to help to develop their economic growth. And also on the social development, social economic development. So this one of the indicators also for the open science. But I think this is something is the index also missing, the actor also missing. That's through my observation.
Thank you very much. And indeed, we do have entrepreneurs in our original list of actors for open science. So something to definitely have a look at. And definitely, I don't think that we found any, or we did not receive, or we didn't map any open science related capacity building materials targeting technopreneurship or entrepreneurs more specifically. We also, I think, here enter into the realm of open innovation, which is very interesting, and we're going to have to, with time, understand how to have the discussion on open innovation. There are some references to it in the recommendation, but it has stayed relatively with low level of priority because the accent really was on open science more broadly. So these are definitely some of the issues that will need to be considered going forward. And again, if you have any suggestions or any examples that you can share with us, please do so through the survey or by writing to us, and then we'll indicate where to put the information so that we can collect it properly. Great, thank you very much for that.
Maybe my contributions on what they want when talk about the open science. They want to have a good case study, best practices for the technopreneurship and incubation. So they want to see all those case study, especially from the successful developers, you know, how they really succeed in the business. So maybe we can share on the case studies, best practice case study. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. And let me just remind everybody that we also do have a call open for best practices in open science more generally. And this is also what our member states are looking at, because they're trying to understand, you know, what are some examples that exist in other parts of the world that they could maybe have a look at, get inspired to do something similar in their countries as well. So please do share with us any case studies of best practice or any additional information that could be useful. I am looking at the chat. Gitte, would you like to share with us some of your thoughts with regard to some of the gaps that we see in the current mapping that we did?
Yes, sure, I can. So we've just done this mapping of citizen science training materials. A lot of it is available on the EU Citizen Science platform, which makes life a lot easier for us. But obviously there's quite a lot out there that is floating around and not there and so on. We have tried to map it. I popped the link in earlier in the chat, but I think there is a massive, huge gap because a lot of it is targeted specifically at citizen scientists to get them into the different projects, which is all good and fine and great, or it's targeted to project managers or researchers or organizations who would like to set up citizen science projects, which is also great. But there are only a couple of policy briefs, so not a lot for policymakers, and especially there is nothing for institutional staff. So even though researchers might go, citizen science is a great idea, it can really help me, but I don't know where to begin. So that's both in, you know, for the communication staff, it's for the funding staff, where are they supposed to go? I mean, I'm trying to train hours here at the university and, you know, there are all these citizen science, blah, blah, anyway. And then it's also important for management. We need the buy-in. So there's a lot of bottom-up happening in citizen science, and I'm sure across everything in open science. Some areas are more top-down, it seems, like open access, because that has been talked about for decades now. And there are national policies on some of them. So some of the areas are coming top-down, which is good, but the citizen science is more a bottom-up thing, very often at least. And if we don't enable those people, those staff and management to understand what it is, they can't support it. How are they going to do it?
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thanks. Thanks so much. And I see our staff being very supportive also of what you're saying, because indeed, this is some of the issues that we've been thinking about and talking about here in the team. So thank you very much for that. We'll make sure we capture that one way or another. And also it is absolutely true. There are parts of open science, elements of open science, which are heavily or even more and more top down, and then others that are entirely bottom up. And we kind of have to find a way to balance this. And we're trying to do that by saying open science is all of that. So let's kind of try to work on all of these elements at the same time. But it's not easy. Also because there is often different people, entities, parts of departments that are in charge of one part of open science, not about the other. So again, trying to bring all of these things together is going to be something very important. And that brings me to 2 points. And I see my colleague, Willy Guillermo Alno, who is raising his hand. But that brings me to the points, like the need for these open science courses that are really broadly open science, that do talk about all the different elements of open science. And we really have not found many of those, if maybe not even one, that would look into the different parts of open science as per the recommendation. This is why we are very much excited that our colleagues in Montevideo, and Willy is here to tell us a little bit more about that. Hopefully he's bringing some good news from his recent meetings. That they would like to develop a MOOC on open science as it is in the recommendation, precisely to kind of bring together all of these different elements. And then we would, of course, try to translate it in the different languages and promote it as as a more holistic way of teaching open science and engaging with open science. So Willy, the floor is yours. I don't know if that's what you wanted to talk about, but if you can also talk about that, that would be great.
Anna, you just said it, so I can go.
You can do. You can go more in detail.
Well, yes, we find, well, in some point I see the presentation that Latin America has a lack of representation in that index. I think that maybe we have to push more here, because for sure there are more than one initiative. But on the other hand, we realize that we need to produce some kind of instrument to teach, to capacity, to make and start on capacity building on the recommendation. And that's why we thought in produce this MOOC. And we started with we have the script, and we are already doing the shootings of the testimony to build up the MOOC. I have to say that we already advanced in many. We take an advantage opportunity the last week that we realized a workshop with the French cooperation on open science in general, and we have many of the regional voices. I have to say, I think that it's going to be useful for all the world, but it's going to have a bias, a Latin American bias, because we are taking Latin American expert on that. I'm proud that Latin America is one of the most advanced region in implementing open science, and that's why I think that we have very qualified voices here to talk about different aspects. But we are trying to gather the different aspects. We also have a really nice experience I can share. We have the voice of one of the Chilean constitutional persons that was in charge of the Commission of Science and other languages, and other communities, and other knowledge frameworks, and that was in a constitutional reform aspect. So I think that it's very nice testimony of how science has to dialogue with other kind of knowledge, and so on. We are gathering different open access, open data, and we have the opportunity 2 weeks ago to have here people from Global Imaging institution. So they have shared with us the challenges of shared equipment and big infrastructures in order to build up science. And we have the willing to do the same with some astronomy communities. So we think that probably we are going to have a good material to produce this MOOC. We have the expectation to have it at the end of the year, to launch it next March, in terms of have a good calendar on the public, avoiding the holiday seasons, and starting with the beginning of the year. But I think it's gonna fix one of the empty square there in our
Absolutely, we really are looking forward to it, and again, I think this working group, and of course us in Paris, we are happy to provide guidance or help or read through when it's ready. We would be very happy to be engaged as much as you feel like it's necessary and appropriate. So thanks very much for that. And indeed, it is important to get a little bit more materials from Latin America. We will be counting on you maybe to spread the call a little bit more, because I'm sure that there is more in Latin America, and it's important to get training materials from Latin America, because open science is big there as well, and it's important that people can find their resources also on UNESCO's index. I saw a couple of good comments from Jennifer Miller and other people voting on her comments. So Jennifer, if you could, if it's okay for you to say a few words, just share with us your comments. And I would also like to say that we will get back to you with regards to the syllabus that was developed, and we would like to touch base with you on that. We've discussed it in the first meeting. We did not forget about it. We just had to see a little bit where the different gaps are, how things are looking. And I think for the next steps, it will be very important to pilot the syllabus and try to understand how we can have a course on open science around the open science recommendations in different countries, in different universities or schools in countries. We have to see what the appropriate level would be. So I wanted to mention that first, and then Jennifer, please do share with us your comments on the guide and everything.
Right. So in looking over resources for helping people learn about open science, I think I'm not the first to notice that resources tend to cluster around data and open access publishing. There is a lot of material in those areas. And we sometimes it seems to be presented as perhaps a coincidence, or why did that happen? And I'm also probably not the first to have the insight here, but it's not always mentioned explicitly that those are areas where there's a pretty clear economic stake and a lot of readily identified economic actors who are interested in producing training around those spaces. And although we have people from every sector clearly represented on this call, we are a lot of government and social and civil society actors. And how do we make that space and let the markets do the markets with some check on them, but keep our focus on some of the humanistic aspects of these decisions, which is where we can perhaps have the greatest influence.
Yeah, that is very useful, Jennifer, and indeed spot on. I mean, that's the kind of platforms that we indeed would need to advance the courses and capacity building, awareness raising around some other aspects of open science as well. I see, Cecile, also your inputs on open badges. Would you like to share that with us a little bit and talk to us about the open badges?
Yes, with pleasure. Well, we have been working in the academia, but also the entrepreneurship thing made me think about it, on alternative recognition. We can see for both trainers and trainees that there is a strong development. It has started like 10 years ago. On badges, open badges, you have an example provided by Gita, but it's one example amongst many. Maybe that could be interesting to see what is already happening with open badges communities, because they already exist, and maybe recommend some recognition for those skills and competencies. Because, for example, I myself followed the MOOC on open science a few years ago by Delft University, TU Delft. That was really interesting. I didn't want to pay for certification, but I would have been very happy to receive a badge for the completion of all the work done and show that I have acquired these competencies and I can start to be a trainer maybe one day myself, or a train the trainer thing. So there is a dynamic here that we could consider maybe.
Yeah, that's very good. And this also makes us think of the connections between this working group and the one on incentives. And how can we incentivize more, including through rewards or recognitions, capacity building courses and acquirements of the relevant and related skills and competencies. So very, very, very useful. And we will definitely have a look at these badges models. I personally didn't know about them, so it's very good to see how that works and how that can be somehow included into the schemes of rewardings and recognitions for open science practices. Perfect. That's very, very useful. Is there anybody else who would like to take the floor or share with us some of their comments or ideas or initiatives that they are involved with? Now is the right time for that. I don't know, Tiffany or Ferry or Ezra, if you saw some other comments in the chat, or if I've missed something? Clara, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
One aspect we've already have discussed, and we had some major setbacks in our timeline, is really to develop resources regarding the predatory practices that are emerging around open science, open access practices. We basically decided to take a new approach and use the sliding scale by IAP, and not just do the simple checklist of if it's this, then out, and then it's predatory, because what we have seen very much is that the classic checklist approach leads to an attitude we've seen with many researchers who say, oh, if I see that a journal is from India, I just toss it out, because then the likelihood is very great that it's predatory. So we really try a more encompassing view and really taking the whole sliding scale into view and develop a best practice from there. So also acknowledging, yes, there are also poor quality open access journals, but that doesn't mean that you have to discard them and ignore them. On the contrary, they need support, probably also through incentives, through training, etc. But this will take us a little while, definitely 3 to 4 months. But this is something we will also bring to the table, but it will take us a little while to really finalize it and polish it.
Great, thank you very much. And talking about, you know, the predatory journals, when we do trainings for open science for early career researchers in particular, there is always a part on predatory journals, and we are also basing ourselves on the IAP report. And we will be, in the context of the toolkit, issuing a fact sheet on the predatory journals based on the IAP report. And I was just looking at the latest drafts of that, because it is an important topic, and it is something to look into, including in terms of capacity building, particularly for younger researchers and early career researchers, but not only, even you know, established
Would you be able
researchers.
to share this draft with me?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, we will share it, and we will release them in the next few weeks. We're really just polishing them, and then we'll send them over to the different working groups. Absolutely, yes. Great. Anybody else? No? Okay, well, if there are no more comments at this stage, Tiffany, did you want to say something?
I'd like to just draw people's attention to a diagram that was just shared in the chat by Cecile. We have to scroll a little bit up. We have an active conversation in the chat. Thank you so much, everyone. But there's this visualization of competencies in open science that I think might be helpful for those who are trying to figure out what areas we need to work on. It's interesting, the level of detail that is provided for some areas versus others, which goes back to Jennifer Miller's comment about, for example, issues like open data receiving much more attention than others. For example, if we look at that diagram, which is a circle of open science skills.
Could you share the screen?
Yeah, I think so. Let me.
Or I can share it if you wish.
Or yeah.
Is that visible to everybody?
Perfect. Yes.
Okay, so I'm sharing the English version, and it's available in multiple languages at that link. For example, you'll see here the level of detail that's provided for information and data literacy. I mean, it goes right down to cleaning data. Whereas other big pieces like research integrity, or for example, if we go into citizen science, which is the one that for us, those of us following the recommendation, we're looking at both engagement of societal actors as well as dialogue with other knowledge systems. That's lumped in the greens here. And it has things like engaging the public in research, which is everything from research co-design to identifying entire new ways of publications so that we share credit in a different way or open up publications outside of traditional academic actors and so on. So there's a lot in this diagram, and I think there's merit for, you know, unpacking it for your institution or for your specific approach as we work on implementing the recommendation. But I just thought this is a good reminder. This was a LIBER, a collaborative production, if you will. And I think it is really helpful for people to keep in mind what we're talking about when we're talking about building capacity for open science.
Great. And maybe Cecile, you want to share more? I mean, you probably know about this graph.
Oh, yes, I know, because we have been working so hard on this one. I put in the chat and I saw the question from the colleague. This diagram is available in several languages, English, French, Greek for the moment. Feel free to translate it. It's CCI. Send me your input. That was created by comparing several frameworks that were already existing in the digital skills scope. So this is why it has those several areas that are linked mainly to research, because one of the frameworks was digital education from the European Commission. One was the LIBER strategy, which is about research and research academia, and one from the LERU. So this is why you have this, but feel free to use it. For example, what I use it for is when I'm drafting a policy or a training strategy in my institution, we decide what is our priority. We use it as an entry point, and then we see what is the connected scope. And then we just try to, like Pokemons, we are just trying to have every box tagged, so that we are sure, even if we don't know the scope, we are the training program designers, we are sure to have a broad view and not only what people provide us as expert input, which is important.
This is great. Very, very good and very, very useful. I always tend to look into it through the lens of the recommendation. So something for us to think about in the team and together with you later on is how could we adapt this to fit the lens of the recommendation? And I think there is a lot of overlap there. And maybe we can work on it together to adapt it to the recommendation and yet still keep the information which is in there, which is also in the recommendation. So we'll definitely get back to you on this, Cecile, because I think it will be very useful for us to also produce something similar that at a glance, as you said, gives you an idea of where you are and then tries to connect the dots around the different types of skills that are needed for different parts of the circle, so of the puzzle also, if you want. So great, this is very, very
on
useful.
behalf of LIBER, we are very happy to help with this. Since it is CC BY, we can adapt, of course, with you, and maybe the colleagues will notice, but we put it on the mapping also on the form. This was linked to the work connected with the Zotero library I sent you on the chat to all, and a collection of case studies that we selected all over Europe, but that's a method that can be reused. It's on Zenodo. We have a survey analysis and we provided the questionnaire. So happy to help.
Great, excellent. Thank you very much. Very good. Any other comment? Any other point somebody would like to raise? No? Okay, so maybe what we can do, yes, Susanna, sorry, I see that you still have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Anna. Okay, talking about digitalization, lately, our policymakers and also our country per se, we have a case study whereby now in terms of open science, we also have another tools that we introduce that is through the virtual reality. Whereby the information we share for 24 hours, and then we have a survey and feedback immediately. And then this one to during the awareness program, because awareness program something new. So we want to have a big coverage, the community, the companies, everything. So we try to adopt the virtual reality tool as well as part of our open science. So now it's under the experimental. So we tried one of the policy has been introduced by our government, that is artificial intelligence, AI. So we're using the virtual reality. We can see very good feedback in terms of the knowledge, awareness about the technology, adoption of technology. Maybe this also the, I know that some country, they don't have to, they have the problem on infrastructure. But this is another tool that we consider as part of open science as well. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. It's always exciting to hear about the different tools that exist to help either policymakers or other actors kind of transform the scientific information into something that is useful for them in their functions. And that's precisely what open science is about also, and that is to bring the scientific information closer to those that are also can use it to make some decisions and policies around other issues beyond science itself. Great. So thank you very much for all the inputs and comments. This was very useful. I think we have a little bit more work to do on the concept, note, I mean the principles, and then also we'll sort out the different training materials. We will hopefully receive some more in the coming weeks, and then we will be counting on you to help us with the development of the index and with its evolution and updates, etc. So maybe we could just have the last few slides on the next steps for the group. Great. Next slide, please. Great. So as I was saying, it would be great if you have any additional comment, anything else that you would share with us, would like to share with us with regards to the principles and the index, the materials that we've shared. If you have any comments on any of that, please do send it to us to openscience@unesco.org by the October 5th, 2022. We will again put it all together, send you the revised draft and also the revised index together with a maquette of the index, hopefully within the next month or so. And the idea, as I said, is to launch the capacity building index at the World Science Forum on the 7th of December 2022. Again, we use this opportunity to invite you all to be part of the World Science Forum. It will be on site in Cape Town, South Africa, but also hybrid. We will have a whole day on open science and some plenary sessions on open science as well in the main venue, in the main forum. So it's going to be an exciting times for open science, and we will be sharing most of the deliverables from the different working groups at that occasion. The next phases in the work of the working group will really be to look into the gaps that we have identified and try to understand how to fill those gaps, and also how do we work on monitoring and uptake of open science capacity building practices, but also, as it was mentioned during the meeting today, looking into recognitions and how do we connect more skills and competencies in open science with evaluation of research careers and research more generally. So these are some of the issues that we will be looking into in this working group from January on. For the moment, we will be focusing on the launch of the index, but also, as I said, we would like to roll out the syllabus on open science recommendation in some pilot countries in the beginning of the year as well. So we will come back to you about some of these ideas too. Next slide, please, Sherry. Okay, so just to remind us all of the other working groups, the last meeting of the second working group on open science infrastructures will take place on the 30th of September. For those of you who are following that that working group as well, we will be sharing some documents in the next couple of days, and we are very much looking forward to the discussions there. Again, there will be connections between this working group and the working group on open science infrastructures. So even if you have not been part of the infrastructures working group, you are very welcome to join, and of course your inputs will be very well appreciated. Next slide. And that's it. So all the information about all of our activities are, of course, on our website. We've shared in the chat the link to the survey for capacity building materials. And also we still have ongoing the best practices survey. And I think that was also shared in the chat. So I think with that, I have finished everything I had to say. And I'm turning over to my colleagues, Tiffany, Ferry, and also Ezra, maybe to close the meeting. Tiffany, Ferry, anything else to add?
Nothing to add for me, just to say thank you for all the engagement. I know that there were some comments and questions in the chat that we weren't able to bring up, but be assured it's going to be in the meeting report, and we'll be getting in touch with you individually as well. So thank you to everybody.
I also just want to thank everyone for their attention and for their input. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And thanks to Laura also, who was in the background, making sure that everything is running smoothly and putting everything in the chat when it was necessary. Thank you very much for that. And Ezra, back to you to close the meeting.
Yeah, I shall say almost the same thing. So it's, thanks very much for everyone for their participation, for all the good ideas, suggestions, details, clarifications, and so on. Indeed, there's a lot there, the stuff that we heard, but also in the chat. And indeed, as Tiffany said, we'll trawl through that all and make sure we don't miss anything. And of course, the slides and the recording will be shared for as usual for everyone. And so really, yeah, just to conclude by really saying a huge thank you to everyone for your time, for your participation, your continued participation, especially for those who submitted things in the run up to this. And I please echo the requests and urging you to continue and to send more and further things, the things mentioned and other things that come up. So nothing more to say than that. Thanks very much. Thanks for the active participation and proactive approach everyone's taken. And we look forward to speaking with you again in the next one. Thank you very much. And we can now close the meeting.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good evening.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.